I stood at the hotel check-in with a furious client breathing down my neck when the company card declined. My phone buzzed with a text that read, "The CFO blocked $42,600. Do not spend another cent." Before I could react, my coworker Mallory tilted her head and smiled like she had waited all year for this. Someone had set a trap right in the middle of our business trip, and they wanted me to explode. My name is Lydia Murphy, and at 34 years old, I had built my entire reputation on being the woman who walked into burning buildings and walked out with the furniture intact. I was the head of the Client Recovery Unit at Ridgeway Meridian Group, a title that sounded fancy but essentially meant I was the professional apologist and fixer for our highest value accounts. When a deal was dead in the water, they sent me. When a client was threatening to sue, they sent me. And right now, we were in Nashville, Tennessee, standing in the lobby of a sprawling luxury hotel, trying to salvage the Meridian contract, which was currently bleeding out on the operating table. The humidity of the South clung to my skin, or perhaps that was just the cold sweat of impending disaster. I stood at the check-in desk, my posture rigid, projecting a calm I absolutely did not feel. Behind me stood my team of 3 analysts, looking exhausted from the flight, and standing right next to them, arms crossed and tapping a polished leather shoe against the marble floor, was the chief operating officer of our client company. He was the man we were here to impress, the man whose trust in Ridgeway Meridian Group was already hanging by a thread. I handed the heavy metal corporate credit card to the receptionist. She was a young woman with a bright smile that was about to vanish. "Checking in 5 rooms under Ridgeway Meridian," I said, my voice steady. "And we will need the conference suite prepped for tomorrow morning at 8. The receptionist nodded, took the card, and swiped it. I waited. In my line of work, silence was usually a precursor to screaming, so I had learned to value the quiet moments, but this silence stretched too long. The receptionist frowned. She typed something into her keyboard, then swiped the card again. The machine let out a low, flat beep. "I am sorry. Ms. Murphy," she said, her voice dropping to that discreet whisper service workers use when they are about to deliver bad news. "The card has been declined." The air in the lobby seemed to vanish. I felt the blood drain from my face. "That is impossible," I said, keeping my volume low. "That is a corporate black card with a limit that could buy this building. Please try it again." "I have tried twice," she said, turning the monitor slightly so I could see the red alert box. "It is not a system error. The issuer has flagged the account. It says here that a hold of $42,600 was attempted and blocked, and now the card is frozen for security reasons." $42,600. The number hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I stared at her, trying to process the auditory information. That was an insane amount of money. It was the budget for an entire quarter of client retention, not a single transaction. Behind me, the client cleared his throat. It was a wet, impatient sound. "Is there a problem?" "Lydia," he asked. His voice was not kind. It was the voice of a man who was already looking for a reason to fire us. I turned slowly, forcing a smile onto my face that felt like it was made of cracking plaster. Just a minor security flag. Likely because of the travel location. Banks are overly cautious these days. "Give me 30 seconds to call our finance department." I did not wait for his permission. I stepped away from the desk, my hand shaking as I pulled my phone from my blazer pocket. I dialed Elliot Klein, our chief financial officer. It was 7 in the evening on the East Coast, but Elliot always answered. He picked up on the first ring. "Lydia," he said. There was no greeting, no pleasantry. His voice was as cold as the air conditioning blasting above my head. "Elliot, my card is declining at the hotel." I hissed into the phone, turning my back to the group. "The clerk says there is a block charge for $42,600. You need to clear this immediately. The client is standing 3 feet away from me." "I cannot clear it," Elliot said. I froze. "What do you mean you cannot clear it? We have 5 rooms to book and a dinner reservation in 2 hours. Fix the limit." "Lydia, listen to me very carefully," Elliot said, his tone dropping an octave. "I did not just block the charge. I froze the entire account. I am looking at a series of flagged transactions that triggered a fraud alert level I have not seen in 10 years. Someone is moving money, huge amounts of money, using your authorization codes. That is ridiculous, I whispered, my eyes darting back to the front desk. I am standing here. I have not authorized anything. Do not argue with me. Elliot snapped. This is an order. There is internal fraud occurring. And until I trace the source, no money leaves that account. If you spend one more cent of company money, you will be liable. Do you understand? The line went dead. I stared at the phone screen, the black mirror reflecting my own terrified expression. A fraud alert, $42,600. I turned back to the group. The client was checking his watch. My team looked nervous. And then there was Mallory Vance. Mallory was my counterpart, a woman who had joined the company a year ago and had managed to smile her way into every high-level meeting I organized. She was technically here to assist with logistics, a role she had volunteered for at the last minute. She stood next to the luggage cart, her blonde hair perfectly blown out, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. She looked at me, and her hand went to her mouth in a gesture of shock. Oh my God. Lydia, Mallory said, loud enough for the client to hear. Did you forget to submit the travel pre-approval again? I told you the new system was strict. The accusation hung in the air. Toxic and precise. It was a lie. I had submitted every form 3 weeks ago, but the client did not know that. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. Lydia, if your organization cannot manage a simple hotel booking, I have severe concerns about how you plan to manage our operational recovery. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The trap. I did not know how it had happened, but I could feel the jaws of it snapping shut. If I admitted the card was frozen for fraud, we looked incompetent and dangerous. If I admitted I could not pay, we were sleeping on the street, and the contract was gone. I looked at Mallory. For a split second, the mask of concern slipped. Her eyes were not worried. They were calculating. She was watching me the way a scientist watches a rat in a maze, waiting to see if it would take the cheese or the electric shock. She knew, somehow. She knew exactly what was happening. I had a choice. I could fold. I could tell the client we had a technical issue, cancel the trip, fly home, and let the contract die. I would lose my reputation, but I would be safe from financial ruin. Or I could fix it. I took a deep breath, pushing down the panic that threatened to choke me. I was Lydia Murphy. I did not let deals die. There is a mix-up with the bank due to the interstate travel. I said to the client, my voice steady and authoritative, but it is resolved. I am handling it personally to ensure there are no delays for you. I walked back to the desk. I pulled out my personal wallet. My hands were trembling, so I kept them below the counter where no one could see. I had a personal credit card with a limit I had spent 7 years building up for a down payment on a house. Use this. I told the clerk quietly. Split the transaction if you have to, but get us into those rooms. The clerk took my personal card. I watched her swipe it. I prayed to every god I did not believe in. It approved. 10 minutes later, the client was in the elevator, heading to the penthouse suite. Mallory lingered in the lobby as the rest of the team took their bags. Wow, Mallory said, stepping closer to me. That was a close one. Lydia, you are lucky you have such a high limit on your personal card. Most people live paycheck to paycheck. Cut the act. Mallory, I said, my voice low. She smiled, a small, tight expression that did not reach her eyes. I am just saying, you should be more careful with the paperwork. Elliot is on a warpath these days. She turned and walked toward the elevators, her heels clicking a rhythm of victory on the marble. I stood alone in the lobby. My phone felt heavy in my pocket. $42,600. The number kept repeating in my head. I sat down on one of the velvet sofas in the corner of the lobby and opened my laptop. I needed to see what Elliot was seeing. I logged into the company's internal expense portal, my fingers flying across the keys. The dashboard loaded. I navigated to the Pending Approvals tab. My breath hitched. There was a list, a long list. It wasn't just the big charge. There were dozens of smaller ones, dating back 2 days, catering deposits, venue rentals, private car services, all of them flagged as expedited service, and at the bottom of each digital invoice, in the field marked Authorizing Officer, was my name, Lydia Murphy. I clicked on the timestamp of the $42,600 charge. It had been authorized 4 hours ago. 4 hours ago. I was at 30,000 feet, on a plane with no Wi-Fi, sitting next to my team. I looked at the vendor name on the massive charge. Solstice Executive Services. I had never heard of them. I looked up at the ceiling of the hotel lobby, fighting the urge to scream. Someone had stolen my digital identity. They were draining the company accounts dry, and they had timed the biggest hit to happen exactly when I was most vulnerable, thousands of miles from home, surrounded by witnesses who would watch me fall. I looked toward the elevators where Mallory had disappeared. "You want a war," I whispered to the empty room. "Okay, you have got one." 7 years ago, the client recovery department at Ridgeway Meridian Group did not exist, or rather, it existed as a windowless storage closet on the 4th floor that smelled faintly of ozone and floor wax, where I sat alone with a telephone and a list of people who hated us. Back then, the company's strategy for unhappy clients was to ignore them until they went away or sued, at which point legal would step in. I was the experiment. I was the 27-year-old hire tasked with calling people who were screaming mad and finding a way to make them stay. I did not build this division by sending emails or creating pretty slide decks. I built it by showing up. When a shipment of medical devices was stranded in a snowstorm in Chicago, I did not just track it online. I flew to O'Hare, rented a truck, and stood on the loading dock in sub-zero temperatures until the crates were moving. When our biggest retail partner threatened to walk because of a billing error, I sat in their waiting room for 9 hours until the CFO agreed to see me, and I did not leave until we had shaken hands. That was my currency. Sweat equity, over time. I cultivated a network that was arguably more valuable than the company's actual product. I knew the shift managers at the major logistics hubs by name. I knew which hotel concierge in Manhattan could produce a conference room at 4 in the morning. I knew the private car dispatchers who would drive through a hurricane if I asked them to. I operated on a simple, old-school code if I said I would fix it. It was fixed. My word was iron, and in an industry built on vague promises and fine print, that made me dangerous. It also made the department profitable. By my 5th year, client recovery was retaining 40% of the revenue that was previously bleeding out the door. Grant Hargrove, our CEO, loved the retention numbers. He loved the graphs I sent up to the C-suite every quarter, the ones where the lines went up and to the right. But Grant was a dashboard leader. He liked the result, but he found the process distasteful. He did not want to know that I had to beg a warehouse foreman or negotiate a credit limit increase at midnight. He just wanted to walk into the board meeting and say that customer satisfaction was up. I accepted that. I did not need a pat on the head. I took pride in being the mechanic who kept the engine running while the drivers took the credit for the speed. Then, 12 months ago, Mallory Vance arrived. Mallory was a different species of corporate animal entirely. She was hired as a senior relationship manager, a title that was vague enough to mean everything and nothing. While I was in the trenches, Mallory was in the break room, building alliances. She was polished, articulate, and possessed a terrifying ability to speak for 30 minutes without actually saying anything of substance. She used words like alignment, synergy, and optical calibration. I spoke in deliverables. She spoke in feelings. At first, I did not see her as a threat. I saw her as fluff. I thought that in a company driven by metrics, the person who actually did the work would always be safe. I was naive. The shift happened slowly. Like a temperature change you do not notice until you are already freezing. It started in the Monday morning strategy meetings. I would present a plan to salvage a failing account, outlining the logistical steps, the costs, and the timeline. Mallory would wait until I finished, then tilt her head that same tilt she had used in the hotel lobby and say something like, "Lydia, I love the detail, but I worry this feels a bit reactive. Should we not be focusing on the emotional narrative of the client journey? It sounded smart. It sounded high level, and the executives, bored by my talk of shipping containers and refund processing, would nod. Great point. Mallory, Grant would say, Lydia, work with Mallory on the narrative. Suddenly, I was reporting to her. Even though we were peers, she would volunteer to polish my reports, which meant stripping out the hard data and replacing it with buzzwords and glowing adjectives about her own team's contribution. When a project succeeded, she would stand at the front of the room and present it, using we when she meant I, and the team when she meant Lydia. When a project hit a snag, she would step back and say, I think Lydia is handling that specific execution piece, effectively isolating me as the sole owner of the failure. The worst part was the personality campaign. Mallory was a master of the concern troll. She would pull colleagues aside and whisper, Is Lydia doing okay? She seems so stressed lately. I tried to offer a new idea, but she was so rigid. I just worry she is burning out. She painted me as difficult. She painted my adherence to protocol as an inability to innovate. She painted my directness as aggression. And because I was busy working, I was not there to defend myself. I was the person with the furrowed brow, buried in spreadsheets. While she was the person buying the office donuts and asking about the CEO's kids, I tried to keep the peace. I told myself that I could afford to share the spotlight. I let her put her name on the annual recovery audit, even though she had not opened a single file. I let her take the lead on the client dinners, sitting quietly while she charmed the executives with stories that were half true. I thought if I fed the beast, it would leave me alone. I thought that if I just kept my head down and did the work, the truth would eventually rise to the top like cream. My father used to tell me, Don't play dirty, Lydia. It leaves a stain on your hands that never washes off. I lived by that. I refused to gossip. I refused to manipulate. I believed that competence was its own shield. I was wrong. Competence is not a shield. In a toxic environment, competence is a target. Sitting there in that Nashville hotel lobby, staring at the fraudulent charges on my screen, a memory surfaced from 2 weeks prior. It was late, past 8 in the evening. The office was empty except for the cleaning crew. I had been heading to the elevator when I bumped into Elliot Klein. The CFO looked tired. He was a man who lived his life in grayscale, seeing the world only as liabilities and assets. He had stopped me, his hand resting on the elevator door to keep it open. Lydia, he had said, his voice gravelly, you handle a lot of the vendor relationships for the ops team. Correct, most of them, I had replied, shifting my bag on my shoulder. Why? He had hesitated, adjusting his glasses. I am seeing some irregularities, a hole in the travel and expense budget. It is small right now, but it is bleeding. Consistent overages, rush fees, vendors I do not recognize. Do you want me to audit the vendor list? I had asked, immediately going into problem-solving mode. No, Elliot had said, his eyes searching my face. Not yet. Just keep your receipts, Lydia, and be careful who you trust with your authorization codes. We are moving into a volatile quarter. I had thought he was warning me about sloppy accounting from the junior staff. I had thought he was asking me to be a gatekeeper. It never once occurred to me that he was looking at me and wondering if I was the thief. It never occurred to me that while I was busy saving the company's reputation with clients, someone inside the building was systematically dismantling mine. I looked at the transaction log again. The first fraudulent charge had appeared 3 days after that conversation with Elliot. Mallory had known. She had known Elliot was looking, and she had decided that if a head was going to roll, it wasn't going to be hers. She needed a scapegoat, someone with high access, someone who made a lot of transactions, and someone whose reputation she had already spent a year softening up for the kill. She had not just stolen money, she had stolen my history. She had taken 7 years of integrity and turned it into the perfect cover for a crime. I closed the laptop with a snap. The despair I had felt 10 minutes ago was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I was done playing nice. I was done sharing the spotlight. Mallory Vance wanted to frame me for being the difficult one. Fine. She was about to see just how difficult I could be. The war for my reputation did not begin with a loud explosion. It began with a series of quiet, helpful suggestions that were designed to bleed me dry. In the months leading up to the Nashville disaster, the atmosphere in the office shifted. It was a subtle change, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. I would be sitting in a cross-departmental meeting, outlining the risk assessment for a new client onboarding protocol, and Mallory would wait for me to finish. She would not argue with my data. Instead, she would smile, that practiced, sympathetic smile that never reached her cold eyes, and she would sigh. "Lydia," she would say, her voice pitched perfectly to sound like a concerned friend. "I appreciate the rigor you put into this, but does anyone else feel like this process is a little controlling? We are trying to build a culture of trust here. This feels very old guard." She would look around the room, inviting agreement, and because no one wants to be the person advocating for boring safety checks over exciting trust, heads would nod. "I am just thinking about agility," she would continue, leaning back in her chair. "Lydia, you are so good at the details, but sometimes I worry you get stuck in the weeds. We need to be visionary. We need to operate from a place of abundance, not a place of fear." It was brilliant. If I defended my process, I looked defensive and rigid. If I stayed silent, I accepted her characterization of me as a dinosaur. Every time I mentioned compliance, she countered with innovation. Every time I mentioned risk, she countered with empowerment. She turned my competence into a personality flaw. The gaslighting moved from the conference room to my desk. I started noticing small, maddening inconsistencies in my work. I would save a project timeline on the shared drive on Tuesday evening, ready for a Wednesday morning presentation. When I opened the file the next day in front of the team, the dates would be wrong. Deadlines would be shifted back by a week, or key deliverables would be missing. I would stare at the screen, my heart racing. "I updated this," I would stammer. "I swear I updated this last night." Mallory would be the first to speak. "It is okay, Lydia," she would say soothingly. "We all have a lot on our plates. Maybe you just forgot to hit save. We can work with the old version." She made me look scattered. She made me look like I was losing my grip. I started taking screenshots of my file properties just to prove to myself that I wasn't going crazy. I checked the edit logs, but they were inconclusive, just admin edits that could have come from any system update. I felt like I was walking on quicksand. Mallory, meanwhile, was cementing her alliances. She spent her lunch breaks with the director of human resources. I would walk past the glass-walled cafeteria and see them laughing over salads. I knew exactly what words she was planting in those conversations. I heard them echoed back to me in my mid-year review. Teamwork, alignment, leadership presence. These were weaponized buzzwords. They were the corporate way of saying I was not part of the club. Mallory was positioning herself as the bridge builder, the one who connected people, while painting me as the technician who lived in a silo. She was the face of the company. I was just the hands. The tension culminated 3 weeks before the Nashville trip with the failure of the Kensington project. It was a small renewal contract, routine work for my team. I had prepared the renewal agreement and sent the final approval email to the client's procurement officer, or at least, I thought I had. 3 days later, the client called Grant Hargrove, furious. The contract had expired. Their service had been auto-suspended, and they had received no communication from us. I was summoned to Grant's office. Mallory was there, of course, sitting on the plush leather sofa, looking regretful. "Lydia," Grant said, tossing a printout onto his desk. "The client says you ghosted them. We almost lost a 10-year account over a paperwork error. What is happening?" "I sent the email," I insisted, pulling out my laptop. "I sent it on Tuesday at 4 in the afternoon." I opened my sent folder to show him. The email was there, but when I clicked on the recipient, my stomach dropped. The email address was wrong. It was missing a single letter, a typo. I stared at the screen. "I have this contact saved in my address book. I do not type it manually." "I took a look at the contact card in the shared database," Mallory said softly. "It looks like someone might have manually updated the entry with the wrong info. Probably just a glitch. Lydia, but you really should double-check before you hit send. She looked at Grant. I managed to smooth it over with them. I told them Lydia has been under a lot of personal stress lately and asked for a grace period. They agreed to reinstate the service. She had saved the day. I had caused the problem. That was the narrative. Grant looked at me. For the first time in 7 years, I saw genuine doubt in his eyes. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Lydia, he said, can we speak candidly? Always, I said, though my throat felt tight. Are you okay? He asked. I have been hearing some feedback. People are saying you are difficult to reach, that you are becoming defensive when people offer help. And now this? Is the workload too much? Grant, I am doing the same job I have always done, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The feedback you are hearing is coming from one specific source. Grant held up a hand. Stop. Do not make this about personality conflicts. Perception is reality in this business. Lydia, if the team feels you are blocking flow, then you are blocking flow. I need you to step back and think about your leadership style. Take a page from Mallory's book. She is very effective at building consensus. The comparison stung more than the reprimand. He wanted me to be more like the woman who was sabotaging me. I walked out of that office feeling hollowed out. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired. I looked paranoid. I looked exactly how she wanted me to look. Then came the Meridian contract crisis. The biggest deal of the year was shaky, and we had to go to Nashville to save it. I was in overdrive, booking flights, preparing the recovery strategy, and mapping out every possible scenario. I was in the break room, pouring my 4th cup of coffee, when Mallory walked in. She was wearing a pristine white blazer, looking fresh and energetic. I heard about Nashville, she said, leaning against the counter. High stakes. We will handle it, I said shortly, stirring my coffee. I bet you are swamped with the strategy piece, she said. Look, I know we have had our friction, but I want the company to win. Why don't I come along? I stopped stirring. You want to come to Nashville? Just for support, she said, shrugging. I can handle the logistics, booking the hotel, the dinners, the car service, the grunt work. That way, you can focus purely on the client presentation. You look exhausted. Lydia, let me take the administrative load off your plate. My internal alarm bells should have been deafening, but I was exhausted. I was drowning in work, trying to prove I wasn't slipping, and the idea of offloading the travel coordination was incredibly tempting. I thought she was trying to get close to the glory of saving the deal. I thought she just wanted to be in the room where it happened. I did not realize she wanted to be the one to lock the door. Fine, I said, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. You handle the bookings, but everything goes through the corporate portal, no shortcuts. Of course, she said, her smile widening just a fraction. Strictly by the book, I will take care of everything. I walked away, thinking I had just bought myself some breathing room. I did not know I had just handed her the weapon she would use to execute me. Nashville was not just a business trip, it was an ultimatum wrapped in a boarding pass. The Meridian contract was the crown jewel of our quarterly revenue, and it was currently dangling by a very thin, very frayed thread. If my team and I could walk into that conference room, smooth over the operational hiccups, and get the COO to sign the renewal, I was guaranteed the promotion to director. That title was more than just a pay bump. It was armor. It meant tenure. It meant a severance package if things went south. And it meant I would finally have the authority to block people like Mallory from dismantling my work. But if we failed, Grant Hargrove had not used the word fire, but he had used the phrase departmental restructuring in the corporate lexicon. That was a polite way of saying he would take my team out back and shoot us. I spent the week before the flight in a state of controlled mania. I did not sleep. I operated on espresso and adrenaline. My desk became a war room of color-coded binders, contingency plans, and printed itineraries. I mapped out every variable. I knew the traffic patterns in Nashville between the airport and the hotel. I knew the dietary restrictions of every person on the client's board. I had a backup venue reserved in case the hotel conference room flooded or burned down. I had a discretionary fund approval for $2,000 for emergency client dinners. I was leaving nothing to chance, or so I thought. 3 days before departure, Mallory appeared at the edge of my cubicle. She was holding a green smoothie, looking like she had just come from a spa, while I looked like I had been living in a wind tunnel. "Lydia," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "you look like you are about to snap. Put the highlighter down." "I am fine," I said, not looking up from the contract draft. "I just need to finalize the vendor payments for the AV equipment." "Let me do it," she said. I paused. I looked up at her. "What?" "The vendor stuff," she said, stepping into my workspace. "The hotel room block, the car service, the AV setup. I know you like to control everything, but you need to focus on the presentation. If you walk into that meeting looking this tired, the client is going to smell blood. Let me handle the logistics. It is just data entry. Lydia, I can manage it." My instinct was to say no. My gut screamed that handing over the credit card authorization to Mallory was like handing a loaded gun to a toddler, but I was drowning. The presentation deck was only half finished, and the legal addendum needed a complete rewrite. "I need everything logged in the central portal," I said slowly. "No side deals, no phone bookings. Everything has to have a paper trail." Mallory laughed, a light, airy sound that grated on my nerves. "Of course. Lydia, I know the rules. I will put everything through the system, assign it to the Nashville project code, and send you the confirmations. You won't even have to think about it." I looked at her. She looked sincere, or at least, she looked helpful. "Fine," I said, "but I want to see the receipts by Friday morning." "You got it," she said, and she walked away with a bounce in her step. I went back to the legal addendum, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. It was a mistake. I had just opened the gate. The first red flag appeared on Thursday afternoon. I was clearing out my inbox when I saw an automated notification from a vendor I did not recognize. The subject line read, "Confirmation Elite Global Concierge, VIP Upgrade Package." I frowned. I hadn't ordered a VIP package. We were staying at a nice hotel. "Yes, but standard executive rooms." I clicked the email. It was a receipt for a pre-authorization check of $1, followed by a note that the full itinerary had been confirmed. The vendor name, Solstice Executive Services, was listed in the fine print. I stood up and walked over to Mallory's desk. She was on the phone, laughing, but she hung up when she saw me approaching. "What is this?" I asked, holding up my phone to show her the email. "Who is Solstice Executive Services, and why am I getting a VIP upgrade confirmation?" Mallory barely glanced at the screen. "Oh, that," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "Do not worry about it. The travel portal has a new algorithm. It automatically queries high-end vendors to see if we qualify for free upgrades based on our corporate status. It sends out those pings automatically. It is just a system glitch." I ignored it. "It says confirmed," I said. "It says confirmed for the query." She corrected me, her voice taking on that patronizing tone she used when she wanted me to feel stupid. "Lydia, relax. I booked the standard rooms at the Marriott. Just like we discussed. The receipts are already in your folder. That email is just spam from the booking engine." I looked at her face. She was perfectly calm. There was not a bead of sweat on her forehead. "If I see a charge for a VIP package, I am going to lose my mind," I said. "You won't," she said, turning back to her computer. "Focus on the pitch. I have the logistics under control." I walked back to my desk, but the unease didn't leave me. I checked the expense portal. There were no large charges, just the standard hotel deposit. Mallory was right. The system showed everything was normal. I forced myself to let it go. I had bigger problems to solve. The morning of the flight, the air at the airport was thick with tension. My team was huddled by the gate, going over the slide deck one last time. Mallory was sitting a few seats away, reading a magazine, looking entirely unbothered by the fact that our careers were on the line. I checked my phone to make sure the boarding passes were ready. That was when the text message came through. It was from Elliot Klein. I stared at the screen. The CFO never texted. He sent emails, and he sent formal memos. A text message from Elliot was like seeing a shark fin in a swimming pool. Lydia. The text read, "I am seeing a lot of activity on the travel account this week. If anything looks odd on this trip, call me immediately. Do not wait." My stomach turned over. A lot of activity. I had checked the portal yesterday. It was empty except for the basics. I typed back, "What kind of activity?" I checked the logs. It looked clean. 3 dots appeared, then they vanished. Then they appeared again. Finally, the response came. "Just keep your eyes open. Safe flight." It was the most terrifying safe flight I had ever received. It felt less like a wish for a good journey and more like a warning that the parachute had been tampered with. I looked over at Mallory. She caught my eye and smiled. She held up her coffee cup in a mock toast. "Ready to crush it?" she mouthed. I nodded stiffly. I wanted to go over there and demand to see her laptop. I wanted to ask her what activity Elliot was talking about, but they were calling our boarding group. The client was already walking down the jet bridge. If I caused a scene now, if I delayed the flight or started an interrogation in the terminal, I would look unhinged. I boarded the plane. I took my seat in the aisle, my laptop open on my tray table before we even pushed back. I tried to work, but my mind kept circling back to Elliot's text. If anything looks odd, the flight to Nashville was 2 hours of turbulence. I sat with my eyes closed for most of it, running through the presentation in my head, trying to drown out the gnawing anxiety in my gut. We touched down at 1 in the afternoon. The tires screeched against the tarmac, and the plane shuddered as it slowed. The fasten seatbelt sign dinged off. Around me, 100 passengers reached for their phones. I did the same. I turned off airplane mode. The phone vibrated instantly. A notification banner slid down from the top of the screen. It wasn't a text. It was an alert from the corporate banking app, which I had installed on my personal phone for emergencies. Alert pending transaction. My thumb hovered over the screen. My heart hammered against my ribs. I unlocked the phone. The screen was bright, almost blinding in the dim cabin. Merchant Solstice Executive Services. Amount $42,600. Status, pending approval. Flagged for review. I stared at the number. The digits seemed to swim before my eyes. $42,600. That was not a hotel room. That was a car. That was a salary. That was a crime. "Lydia." I looked up. Mallory was standing in the aisle, her carry-on bag slung over her shoulder. She was looking down at me, her expression unreadable. "We are moving," she said. "Let's go. The car is waiting." I looked at her, then back at the phone. The VIP upgrade she had called a glitch. The activity Elliot had warned me about. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a mistake. It was a bomb, and it had just detonated in my pocket. The lobby of the Nashville Grand was no longer just a hotel entrance. It was a courtroom, and I was on trial without a lawyer. The air conditioning was humming, but I felt beads of sweat rolling down my spine, soaking into my blouse. The receptionist was holding my corporate card like it was a piece of radioactive waste, her expression a mix of pity and annoyance. Behind me, the line of guests was growing, but the only person who mattered was standing 3 feet to my left. Marcus Thorne, the chief operating officer of our client company, was not a man accustomed to waiting. He was watching the transaction fail with the grim fascination of someone watching a car crash. "I can try it a 3rd time, ma'am," the receptionist said, her voice loud enough to carry to the back of the room. "But the system is giving me a code 99. That is a hard block for potential fraud." The word fraud hung in the air between us. My team 3 bright, young analysts who looked up to me shifted uncomfortably. They looked at their shoes. They looked at the ceiling. They looked anywhere but at me. Then Mallory stepped forward. She placed a hand on my shoulder. It was meant to look comforting, a gesture of solidarity. But her grip was tight, her fingernails digging slightly into the fabric of my jacket. "Oh, Lydia," she sighed, shaking her head. I told you that you needed to update your compliance forms before we left. The finance department does not play around with the new spending caps. She said it with the tone one uses for a forgetful, elderly relative. She wasn't defending me. She was defining the narrative. To everyone within earshot, she was saying that this was my administrative failure. My phone vibrated in my hand. It was Elliot Klein. I stepped away from the counter, turning my back on the humiliation for a brief second. "Excuse me," I muttered to the group. I answered the phone. "Elliot, you have to unblock the card. Right now. We are at the desk." "Lydia, listen to me." Elliot's voice was devoid of its usual dry humor. It was sharp, clinical. "I cannot unblock it. This is not a glitch. I have flagged the account because there is a cluster of transactions occurring simultaneously with your login credentials. We are talking about $42,600 that just hit the pending queue, and another $12,000 in attempting charges from a vendor in Miami. I am in Nashville," I whispered furiously, pressing the phone to my ear. "I am standing in a lobby in Nashville. I am not spending money in Miami." "I know that," Elliot said, "but the system does not. Someone is using your identity to move capital. If I unfreeze the card, the money is gone. I have to keep the lock on until the fraud team isolates the breach. Elliot, if I cannot pay for these rooms, we lose the client. He is standing right there." "Then you find another way," Elliot said, "because if I release that hold, I am complicit in grand larceny. Do not touch the corporate funds." "Lydia, that is an order." The line went dead. I stood there for a second, the silence of the disconnected call roaring in my ears. I felt a wave of nausea. This was not just a stolen credit card number. This was a targeted strike. Someone knew exactly when I would be most vulnerable. I turned back to the desk. Marcus Thorne was looking at his watch. "Is there an issue, Ms. Murphy?" he asked. His voice was low, dangerous. "Because if Ridgeway Meridian cannot manage the cash flow for a hotel stay, I have to wonder how you are managing the operational budget for my supply chain." That was the dagger. He wasn't worried about the hotel room. He was worried about the millions of dollars in contracts we managed for him. My competence was the product, and right now, the product was defective. "It is a security protocol," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to steal it. "Our fraud detection is extremely sensitive to interstate travel. It is actually a feature of our security, not a bug. It protects your data as well as ours." It was a good spin, but Marcus didn't look convinced. "It looks like disorganization to me," he said. I took a breath. I reached into my purse and pulled out my personal wallet. My hands were trembling. I pulled out my own credit card, the one I used for groceries, for gas, for the rainy day fund I had been saving for years. "I will handle this personally," I told the clerk. "Please charge this card for the rooms." Mallory leaned in. "Lydia, are you sure that is a lot of money? Do you have the limit for that?" "It is fine," I snapped, too loudly. The clerk swiped my personal card. I held my breath. I had a limit of $15,000. The rooms for 3 nights would be close to $6,000. It would go through, but it would cripple my personal finances until I could fight for a reimbursement that might never come. "Approved," the clerk said. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Great. Keys, please." We got the keys. The crisis was technically averted, but the damage was done. The team grabbed their bags and headed for the elevators, moving quickly, like they were fleeing a crime scene. Marcus lingered. "I'm going to freshen up," Marcus said. "We have dinner at 7. I assume that reservation is actually valid." "Absolutely," I said. 7 o'clock sharp. He walked away. I slumped against the marble counter. My energy drained. "You know," Mallory said, her voice dropping to a whisper as she stood beside me, "he looks really rattled. Maybe I should go talk to him, just to reassure him that this is just an internal thing with you, and not a reflection on the company as a whole." I looked at her. Her eyes were wide, innocent. "An internal thing with me?" "Well, yeah," she said. "I mean, if you are under audit or whatever, He deserves to know that the rest of the team is stable. I can smooth it over. I speak his language. Do not go near him, I said. I mean it, Mallory. Do not discuss my standing with the client. Okay, she said, holding up her hands in mock surrender. Geez, Lydia, I am just trying to help you save face, but if you want to dig the hole deeper, be my guest. She turned and walked toward the elevators. I watched her go. A knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I knew she wasn't going to her room. She was going to find Marcus. I waited 5 minutes. Then I went up to my room. I didn't unpack. I threw my bag on the bed and immediately sat down at the heavy wooden desk. I opened my laptop. I needed to see it. I needed to see the monster that was eating my career. I logged into the enterprise resource planning system. My fingers flew across the keys. I bypassed the standard dashboard and went straight into the procurement logs. I filtered for the last 24 hours. There it was, the transaction that had triggered the freeze. Solstice Executive Services, $42,600. But I looked closer. I expanded the details of the vendor profile. The vendor name was listed as Solstice Exec, SVCs. Event Div. It looked legitimate. It looked like the kind of high-end concierge service we used for retreats. But when I checked the tax ID number associated with the vendor, it didn't match the Solstice group we had on file in the master database. It differed by 2 digits. It was a spoof account, a fake vendor profile created to look like a real one, so that at a glance, no one in accounting would question it. I scrolled down to the audit trail of the transaction itself. Every action in our system left a digital fingerprint. Who requested the funds? Who approved them? Who released the payment? My eyes scanned the lines of code. Request timestamp today, 09:15 a.m. EST. Request origin IP 192.168x. Internal network. HQ. Requesting user ID. M. Vance. My heart stopped. Mallory. She had created the request this morning while we were at the airport. She must have done it from her phone or a remote login, spoofing the HQ IP address. But a requesting user cannot approve their own high-value transaction. That was a basic control. It needed a second signature, a director-level approval. I looked at the next line. Approving user ID L. Murphy. Approval timestamp. Today, 09:17 a.m. East. I stared at the screen, my mouth dry. At 9:17 this morning, I was standing in the security line at the airport, holding my shoes and my laptop in a plastic bin. I was nowhere near a computer. I was nowhere near the network. Mallory had not just requested the money. She had logged in as me to approve it. She had my password. Or she had a back door. I looked at the vendor name again. Solstice Exec, SVCS. And then I saw the line item description for the $42,000. It wasn't for travel. It wasn't for the Nashville trip. Description Q3 Leadership Retreat. Deposit venue hold. She was using my credentials to fund her own project. She was stealing from the company to pay for the very event she was planning to use to showcase her leadership skills. And she was framing me for the expenditure. If I hadn't looked, if Elliot hadn't frozen the card, that money would have vanished into this fake vendor account. And in a month, when the auditors asked why Lydia Murphy authorized $50,000 for a retreat she wasn't leading, Mallory would have just shrugged and said, I don't know. She insisted on handling the budget. I sat back in the chair, the room spinning slightly. The door to my hotel room seemed very thin. Down the hall, Mallory was probably knocking on Marcus Thorne's door right now, offering a sympathetic smile and a poisonous explanation for why the client recovery lead couldn't pay a hotel bill. I reached for my phone. I didn't call Elliot. Not yet. I needed more than a screenshot. I needed to trace where that money was actually going. I opened a new browser tab. I typed in the name of the fake vendor, Solstice Exec SVCS. Nothing came up. No website. No LinkedIn. I checked the address listed on the invoice in our system. Formkino 2, River Road, Suite B, Wilmington, Delaware. I pulled up Google Maps. I typed in the address. Street view loaded. It wasn't an office building. It wasn't a corporate headquarters. It was a mailbox rental store in a strip mall, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a vape shop. I stared at the image of the dusty storefront. That was where the money was going. I closed the laptop. The fear was gone. It had been burned away by a cold, hard rage. Mallory thought she had trapped me in a hotel lobby in Nashville. She thought she had humiliated me enough to make me quit. She had no idea. She had just given me the map to her own destruction. The silence in my hotel room was not peaceful. It was heavy, pressurized, and suffocating. It felt less like solitude and more like quarantine. News in a corporate environment travels faster than light, and bad news travels instantaneously. I could feel the vibrations of the rumor mill buzzing through the digital ether. My phone, usually a steady stream of client updates and team logistics, had gone strangely quiet. No one was texting me about dinner plans. No one was asking for the slide deck revisions. The silence was an indictment. I knew what they were saying back at headquarters. The narrative was already being written in the break rooms and on the private Slack channels. Lydia Murphy finally crashed. Did you hear the CFO had to personally cut her off? Fraud alert, spending freeze. She tried to charge $50,000 to a company card in Nashville and got rejected in front of the client. I needed a lifeline. I needed someone in leadership who knew my character. Someone who knew that I would sooner cut off my own hand than steal from the company I had spent 7 years building. I dialed Grant Hargrove. It was late on the East Coast, but Grant was the kind of CEO who lived with his phone glued to his palm. He answered on the third ring. "Lydia," he said. There was no warmth in his voice. Usually, Grant greeted me with a jovial inquiry about the client or a joke about the weather. Today, his tone was flat, guarded, and stripped of all familiarity. It was the voice he reserved for legal depositions. "Grant, I need to explain what happened at the hotel," I said, rushing to get the words out before he could cut me off. "The card decline was a security error. I am currently investigating a breach of my credentials. I did not authorize those charges." "Lydia," he interrupted, his voice weary. "I have already spoken to Elliot. He gave me the rundown. Elliot sees a flagged account." I insisted. "He does not see the context. Someone is spoofing my approval codes. I need you to trust me on this. I am going to fix it. But I need time, and I need the rumors to stop." There was a pause on the line. I could hear the faint click of a keyboard in the background. "Lydia, look," Grant said, and the shift in his tone broke my heart. It was patronizing. "We value your contribution. You know that. But when finance flags a compliance issue of this magnitude, my hands are tied. We have investors to answer to. If there is a hole in the bucket, we have to plug it. I am not the hole," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I am the one trying to carry the water. Just cooperate with the investigation," Grant said, effectively dismissing me. "If you have done nothing wrong, the audit will clear you. But for now, do not make this bigger than it is. Keep your head down. Do the presentation tomorrow if you are up to it, or let Mallory handle it if you are too distracted." "I will do the presentation," I said coldly. "Good," he said. "We will talk when you get back. Do not make any more waves." "Lydia," he hung up. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank screen of the hotel television. "If you are up to it." He was already preparing for my replacement. He was giving me an out, a way to fade into the background while Mallory took the stage. A knock on the door made me jump. I composed myself, smoothing down my skirt and checking my face in the mirror. I looked pale, but my eyes were dry. I opened the door. It was Kevin, the youngest analyst on my team. He looked terrified. He was holding a takeout container from a local barbecue joint, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "I brought you dinner," he mumbled. "I figured you probably didn't want to come down to the lobby." I looked at him. Kevin was a good kid. I had hired him straight out of college, taught him how to read a PL statement, and defended him when he made rookie mistakes. "Thank you, Kevin," I said, stepping back to let him in. "That is very kind of you." He set the food on the desk but didn't leave. He stood there, wringing his hands. "What is it?" I asked, It is just, he started, then stopped. He looked at the floor. Mallory came to our room a few minutes ago. She told us to check the presentation deck again. She said we needed to be ready to present without you. I felt a cold spike in my chest. Did she told us, Kevin swallowed hard. She told us that you were going through a personal financial crisis. She said the company card was declined because you had mixed up your personal and professional accounts, and that HR was involved. She told us we should probably distance ourselves from you for a few days, for our own protection. I closed my eyes. It was masterful. She wasn't just framing me for fraud. She was painting me as unstable and toxic. She was isolating me from the very people who could vouch for my work ethic. By the time I walked into the meeting tomorrow, my own team would be looking at me like I was a radioactive isotope. Kevin, I said, opening my eyes and looking him dead in the face. Do you believe that? He looked at me. He looked at the woman who had stayed late to help him prep for his first client review. He looked at the woman who had paid for his hotel room 3 hours ago with her own credit card. No, he said quietly. No, I don't. That is why I brought you the ribs. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. Thank you. Kevin, go get some sleep. We have a contract to win tomorrow. He nodded and slipped out the door. I was alone again, but the despair had shifted into something else. It was clarity. I sat down in the armchair and let my mind drift back over the last 6 months. I replayed every interaction with Mallory Vance. I stripped away the smiles, the compliments, the offers of help. I looked at the raw data of her actions. The time she offered to format my quarterly report, and the numbers came back slightly skewed, making my margin of error look higher. The time a meeting with a key vendor was moved to a different time slot, and I was the only one who didn't get the calendar update, walking in 10 minutes late. The time she accidentally left me off the email thread about the CEO's birthday gift, making me look petty and unengaged. It wasn't clumsiness. It wasn't bad luck. It was a slow, methodical dismantling of my professional credibility. She had been loosening the bolts on my career for a year, waiting for the moment when the pressure was highest to pull the final pin, and she had done it with a smile. A second knock on the door. Heavier this time. I opened it. Mallory stood there. She wasn't smiling now. She had her serious face on. She walked into the room without waiting for an invitation, closing the door softly behind her. Lydia, she said, her voice dripping with syrup. I just wanted to check on you. Marcus is asking questions. I managed to calm him down, but he is worried. I bet he is, I said, leaning against the desk, crossing my arms. Look, Mallory said, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. I know things have been hard for you lately. I know the pressure to deliver numbers is insane. If you borrowed some money against the account, or if you made a mistake with the funds, you can tell me. I can help you fix it before it goes to the board. We can call it an accounting error. I can vouch for you. I stared at her. It was the trap. She wanted me to admit to something I hadn't done. She wanted me to say, yes, I messed up. So she could run to Grant and say, Lydia confessed to me. That is a very generous offer. Mallory, I said, keeping my face completely blank. But there is nothing to confess. I did not spend the money. She sighed, looking at me with deep disappointment. Lydia, please, don't be stubborn. The evidence is all there. I am trying to save you from a criminal investigation. If you just resign quietly, Grant might let it go. You can start over somewhere else. Get out, I said. Excuse me, get out of my room, I said, my voice low and steady. I am not resigning. I am not confessing. And I am definitely not letting you help me. Mallory's face hardened. The mask slipped completely. For a second, I saw the predator underneath. Fine, she said, her voice sharp. Do it the hard way. But do not expect anyone to be there to catch you when you fall. She turned and left, slamming the door. I stood there, shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer effort of holding back the urge to scream. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to work. I walked to the desk and opened my laptop. I wasn't going to fight her with rumors. I wasn't going to fight her with emotion. I was going to fight her with paper, every transaction, every email, every login. I was going to build a fortress of facts that she couldn't smile her way through. My phone rang again. I looked at the screen. It was an unknown number, but the area code was local to our headquarters. I answered it. Lydia Murphy. Ms. Murphy. The voice was a whisper. I recognized it instantly. It was Jessica, a junior clerk in accounts payable. I had helped her organize a charity drive last Christmas. Jessica, I asked, is everything okay? I cannot talk long, she whispered. I'm in the file room. I heard about the freeze. Everyone is talking about it. I know. I said, Ms. Murphy, I should not be telling you this, she stammered. But I was processing the weekly batch uploads, and I saw something. There is an invoice here. It was flagged for manual review because the font on the header looked weird. So I pulled the physical copy. What invoice? I asked, gripping the phone. It is for that vendor. Solstice, she said, the one that triggered the block. But Ms. Murphy, the digital approval stamp has your name on it. But the metadata on the PDF, it was created by a user named M. Vance. And there is something else. What I breathed. The invoice is not just for a retreat deposit, Jessica said. There is a second page that was suppressed in the digital view. It lists a payout instruction. The refund address for any unused funds is routed to a personal LLC. I looked it up. The LLC is registered to a residential address in the city. Whose address? I asked. Though I already suspected. I do not know for sure. Jessica said, but I think it matches the address on the emergency contact form for Mallory Vance. It looks like she is trying to funnel the money out to herself. I closed my eyes, a wave of relief washing over me so powerful it almost knocked me over. Jessica, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You just saved my life. Can you scan that second page? Can you send it to my personal email, not the work one? I can try, she said, but if they catch me, they won't. I said, just send it and delete the sent message. Please. Okay, she whispered. Good luck. Lydia. The line went dead. I looked at the phone. I looked at the laptop. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the prosecutor, and court was in session. The digital file that Jessica had risked her job to send me was sitting in my secure inbox, glowing like a piece of radioactive evidence. It was the second page of the invoice from Solstice Executive Services, the document that had been conveniently suppressed from the main view in the company portal. I stared at it, my eyes burning from the harsh light of the laptop screen in the darkened hotel room. I was no longer a panicked employee trying to pay a hotel bill. I was a forensic auditor dissecting a crime scene. I started with the basics. I pulled up the metadata of the invoice. Every digital file has a DNA sequence, a history of who created it and when. Mallory had been careful, but she was not a technical expert. She had converted a Word document to a PDF. Assuming that would lock the information, it did not. I opened the file properties. The author field did not say Solstice Executive Services. It said M. Vance Work Laptop. She had created the invoice herself. She had typed out a bill for $42,600, saved it, and then uploaded it to the system as if it were an external demand for payment. I moved to the transaction log. I needed to prove that I could not have been the one to approve it. I looked at the timestamp 9:17 in the morning. I opened a separate window and pulled up the flight data from the airline's website. My flight had pushed back from the gate at 9:15. At 9:17, I was in a pressurized metal tube taxiing toward the runway, my phone in airplane mode, my laptop stowed in the overhead bin. Then I looked at the IP addresses. The system showed the request originating from a dynamic IP address assigned to the headquarters guest Wi-Fi network. That was smart of her. It masked her specific desk location, but the approval, the digital signature that carried my name, came from the same IP address. Less than 60 seconds later, that was the smoking gun. It was physically impossible for me to be on the headquarters guest Wi-Fi while I was sitting on a runway at JFK. Mallory had logged in as herself to request the money, then immediately logged in as me to approve it, all from the same device, likely her phone or a tablet she had kept off the corporate network to avoid deep packet inspection. I took a screenshot, then another. I was building a timeline that was unbreakable. Next, I turned my attention to the vendor itself. Solstice Executive Services. I went back to the address I had found earlier, the mailbox rental in Delaware. I needed more than just a Google Maps image. I needed to know who owned the key to that mailbox. I searched the Delaware Business Registry. It is a public database, but you have to know how to navigate the shell companies. Solstice was registered to an LLC called Lumina Holdings. I searched for Lumina Holdings. It was registered to a registered agent service, a common tactic to hide ownership, but they had slipped up. On the initial filing document, listed under Organizer, was a name I recognized: Brandon K. Vance, Mallory's brother. I remembered her mentioning him once at a happy hour, bragging that he was a financial consultant for startups. The circle was closing. Mallory created the fake vendor. Her brother registered the shell company to receive the checks. They were funneling corporate funds into a family bank account, and they were using my budget code to do it. My phone buzzed. It was Elliot Klein. I picked it up immediately. "I have it, Elliot. I have the proof." "Tell me," he said. His voice was grim. "The vendor is a shell company linked to her brother," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The invoice was created on her laptop, and the approval happened when I was literally unable to access the internet. She spoofed my login." Elliot let out a long, heavy sigh. It sounded like the weight of the entire finance department leaving his shoulders. "I knew it," he said quietly. "I knew it was not you, Lydia. But I could not prove it without the external link." "You said you had been tracking a leak," I said. "How long?" 6 months, Elliot said. "It started small. $500 for expedited shipping that never happened, $300 for catering overages. It was always just under the threshold that triggers a manual audit. It was death by 1,000 cuts. I knew someone in operations was bleeding us, but I could not isolate the user because the approvals looked legitimate. You handle so much volume. Lydia, your department spends more on ad hoc vendors than anyone else. You were the perfect camouflage." I felt a cold chill. She used my work ethic against me. She knew I approved things quickly to get the job done, so she mixed her fake charges in with my real ones. "Exactly," Elliot said, "but she got greedy. $42,600 is not a leak. That is a flood. She must have needed a large sum quickly, or she thought she had compromised you enough to get away with one big score before you were fired." "What was the money for?" I asked. "The invoice says, retreat deposit, but we do not have a retreat scheduled." "That is the other thing," Elliot said. I pulled the project codes she assigned it to. It is tagged for the Q3 Future Leaders Summit. It is an internal initiative she pitched to Grant last week. She told him she could fund it out of operational efficiencies. She was going to use stolen money to pay for the event that would get her promoted. The audacity was breathtaking. She was going to rob the company to pay for her own coronation, and she was going to leave me in the wreckage to take the blame for the missing funds. "I need one more thing," I said, my mind racing. "Mallory told the client here in Nashville that I was incompetent. She told them I forgot to book the upgrades. I need to prove that those upgrades never existed." "Do what you have to do," Elliot said, "but be careful. If she knows we are onto her, she might try to purge the system logs." "She cannot purge what I have already downloaded," I said. I hung up and dialed a number from memory. It was the personal cell of Sarah Jenkins, the regional director for the hotel chain we were staying at. Sarah and I had worked together during a crisis in Chicago 3 years ago. "Lydia," Sarah answered, sounding surprised. "It is late. Is everything okay with the rooms?" "The rooms are fine, Sarah," I said, "but I need a favor, a big one. I need you to check the interaction history for our group booking. My colleague, Mallory Vance, claims she received an email confirmation for a VIP upgrade package from your system earlier this week." "Give me a second," Sarah said. I heard typing. "Okay, I am looking at the log. I see the initial booking you made 3 weeks ago. I see the check-in today with your personal card. That is it. There are no other inquiries, no upgrade requests, no emails sent from our side." "Are you sure?" I asked. She showed me an email on her phone. It looked official. Lydia, if it is not in the log, it did not happen, Sarah said firmly. If she has an email, she forged it, or she used a third-party spoofer, but the hotel did not send it. Can you send me a screenshot of the empty log? I asked. Just to prove the negative. Done, Sarah said. Sending it now. I leaned back in my chair. The puzzle was complete. Mallory had faked the upgrade email to lull me into a false sense of security, ensuring I wouldn't check the booking myself. She had timed the fraudulent charge to hit exactly when we landed, knowing the chaos would distract me. She had counted on the public humiliation to break me, to make me look guilty and incompetent, so that when the investigation started, everyone would already be biased against me. She had played a game of chess while I was playing checkers, but she had made one fatal mistake. She assumed I would fold. She assumed I would be too embarrassed to fight back. My laptop pinged. Sarah's email arrived. I had the fake invoice. I had the IP mismatch. I had the shell company link. I had the flight records. And now I had proof that her glitch was a fabrication. I compiled everything into a single, encrypted PDF. I named the file Truth. My phone lit up with a text message from Elliot. The board has been notified. Grant has called an emergency session for tomorrow morning via video conference. Legal and HR will be present. You will need to present your findings. Be ready. I stared at the message. Tomorrow morning. I looked at the clock. It was 2 a.m. In 6 hours. I would face the people who controlled my destiny. I would face the woman who had tried to destroy me. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Nashville skyline. The city was asleep, but I was wide awake. You wanted a narrative, Mallory, I whispered to the glass. I am going to give you one. The morning sun hitting the Nashville skyline did not bring warmth. It brought a declaration of war. At 6 a.m, 2 hours before I was scheduled to present the recovery plan to the client, my inbox pinged with a high-priority notification. It was not from the client. It was not from my team. It was from the Employee Relations Portal at Ridgeway Meridian. Subject formal grievance filed. Incident 9021. Immediate review required. Mallory had realized that her friendly advice in my hotel room the night before had failed. She had sensed the shift in my demeanor, the coldness that had replaced my usual anxiety. Like a cornered animal, she had decided to bite first. I opened the attachment. It was a masterpiece of corporate fiction. Mallory had filed a formal report accusing me of gross financial negligence, hostile behavior toward colleagues, and potential substance abuse affecting judgment. She claimed that my card being declined was the result of me commingling personal debts with company funds, and that I had become erratic and threatening when she tried to assist me. She was trying to get ahead of the audit. She wanted to plant the seed that I was unstable so that any evidence I produced later would look like the desperate ravings of a woman having a breakdown. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was the Director of Human Resources, Linda Gray, and the company's General Counsel, David Sterling. They were calling from headquarters. Lydia, Linda said, her voice tight and professionally neutral. We are in receipt of a disturbing report regarding your conduct in Nashville. Given the financial irregularities flagged by finance yesterday, we need to have a preliminary conversation before you meet with the client. I am listening, I said. I was sitting at the hotel desk, fully dressed in my suit, my spine pressed against the back of the chair. We want to give you a chance to explain the transaction attempt. David, the lawyer, cut in. We are looking at a blocked charge of $42,600. The report suggests you authorized this expenditure outside of protocol. Do you admit to approving this charge? It was a trap. If I said yes, I admitted to fraud. If I denied it, they would pull up the digital log showing my signature and fire me for lying. I took a sip of water. I had rehearsed this with Elliot via text only moments ago. I acknowledged that my unique digital identifier was attached to that transaction, I said, choosing my words with surgical precision. However, I categorically deny that I was the person who executed that approval. Lydia, Linda sighed, sounding disappointed. The system logs are binary. Either you logged in, or you did not. Claiming you were hacked is a very serious defense. It implies a security failure at the systemic level. It implies a security failure at the personnel level, I corrected her. I have sent a packet of data to Elliot Klein. I suggest you review it before we continue this line of questioning. It contains flight telemetry data that proves I was at 30,000 feet, without internet access, at the exact second that approval was logged. We have seen the data, David said dismissively. But we also have a witness statement from Mallory Vance claiming you gave her your password verbally at the airport because you were, quote, too stressed to handle the admin work. She claims she was following your direct verbal instruction. I felt a flash of heat in my chest. It was a lie so bold, so unverifiable, that it was brilliant. It was her word against mine. She was pivoting. If she couldn't deny the timestamp, she would claim she was just my obedient assistant, doing what her boss ordered. I did not give her my password, I said calmly, and I certainly did not order a deposit for a retreat that does not exist. Mallory states the retreat was a confidential initiative you were planning, Linda said. She claims you wanted to surprise the team. They were gaslighting me by proxy. Mallory had constructed a reality where every piece of evidence I had could be twisted into a narrative of my own incompetence. I am not going to debate hearsay, I said. I have a client meeting in 90 minutes. Unless you are firing me right now, I am going to go do my job. There was a silence on the line. They were not ready to fire me yet, not with Elliot blocking the door from the finance side. Proceed with the client, David said, but do not spend a dime, and do not discuss this with anyone. The call ended. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the fight. I needed to break her narrative. She was relying on the ambiguity of verbal instructions and confidential initiatives. I needed to prove that the transaction itself was impossible. Regardless of who approved it, I needed to close the loop on the vendor. I called Sarah Jenkins at the hotel again. Sarah, I said, I need you to go on the record. Not just an email. I need a formal statement on hotel letterhead regarding your deposit policies for corporate retreats. Lydia, I can get in trouble for getting involved in your internal politics, Sarah said, hesitating. You won't, I promised. I am not asking you to comment on me or Mallory. I am asking you to state a fact. Does your hotel require a $42,000 deposit for a standard booking, and did you receive any request for such a deposit? Absolutely not, Sarah said. We bill net 30. We never take upfront deposits for corporate accounts. Write that down, I said. Sign it, and send it to me. If the hotel didn't require a deposit, then the instruction Mallory claimed I gave her was logically invalid. Why would I order her to pay a deposit that wasn't asked for? It would prove that the money wasn't going to the hotel at all. It was going to the shell company. But there was still one loose thread, the login. How did she get into the system as me Mallory was smart? But she wasn't a hacker. She didn't know how to spoof an IP address or bypass two-factor authentication on her own. She had help. I opened the raw data logs Elliot had sent me, the back-end view that regular employees never saw. I looked at the access privileges for the finance portal. At 8 o'clock yesterday morning, 1 hour before the fraud occurred, there was a system modification. A super user had temporarily disabled the two-factor authentication requirement for my specific user profile. It was toggled off for exactly 15 minutes, then toggled back on. That was how she did it. She didn't need my phone, she just needed the password, which she could have easily surfed from over my shoulder any time in the last year. And she needed the security wall dropped for a 10-minute window. I looked at the ID of the super user who made the change. Admin04. I knew who Admin04 was. His name was Greg Nielsen. He was a senior systems architect in IT. He was a quiet guy, always eager to please. And I vividly remembered seeing him having lunch with Mallory 2 weeks ago. She had been laughing, touching his arm, leaning in close. I had thought it was just Mallory being Mallory. I realized now it was reconnaissance. She had charmed him. She had probably fed him a sob story about how I was locking her out of important projects and she just needed a quick workaround to upload some files without bothering me. She had weaponized his crush to commit a felony. I stared at the screen. If I exposed Greg, he was finished. He would lose his job, his pension, and likely face criminal charges. He was a pawn, a useful idiot. I picked up the phone and called Elliot. "It is Greg Nielsen," I said without preamble. "He disabled my 2FA. That is how she got in." "I see it," Elliot said. "I'm looking at the server logs now. The timing aligns perfectly." "Elliot?" I said, my voice faltering. He is harmless. She manipulated him. If we reveal this, we destroy him." "Lydia," Elliot's voice was sharp, cutting through my empathy like a scalpel. "He altered security protocols to facilitate theft. He is not a victim. He is an accomplice." "He probably did not know what she was doing," I argued. "It does not matter," Elliot said. "You are standing on a ledge, Lydia. They are trying to push you off. If you do not push back with everything you have, you are going to fall, and if you fall, Mallory wins. She keeps the money, she keeps the job, and she does it again to the next person." He paused, letting the weight of the situation settle on me. "If you stay silent to protect him, you die." Elliot said, "And the next victim dies too. Do you want that on your conscience?" I closed my eyes. I thought about my team. I thought about the 7 years of late nights. I thought about Mallory's smug face in the lobby. "No," I said softly. "I don't." "Then add it to the file," Elliot said. "We are going to burn the whole network down." I added the server logs to my evidence folder. I drafted a summary explaining the 2FA disablement. I attached Sarah's letter from the hotel. I was ready. I went downstairs. I met the client. I delivered the presentation of my life. I didn't look at Mallory once, though I could feel her eyes boring into the side of my head. I walked through the recovery plan with absolute confidence, answering Marcus Thorne's questions with data and precision. When the meeting ended, Marcus shook my hand. "That was solid, Lydia," he said. "Assuming you can get your internal house in order, we are happy to proceed." "Consider it done," I said. As the client left the room, my phone buzzed. It was a calendar invitation. Sender Grant Hargrove. CEO. Subject Executive Review. Incident 9021. Attendees, Grant Hargrove. Elliot Klein. David Sterling, Legal. Linda Gray, HR. Lydia Murphy. Mallory Vance. Time tomorrow. 08:00 a.m. EAT. Location boardroom. A virtual attendance required. This was it. It wasn't just a meeting. It was a tribunal. Mallory looked at her phone, then at me. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear behind her eyes. She had expected me to be suspended by now. She had expected me to crumble. Instead, I stood up, closed my laptop, and smiled at her. It wasn't a nice smile. "You might want to call Greg," I said quietly as I walked past her. "Tell him he needs a lawyer." The color drained from her face so fast she looked like she might faint. I walked out of the conference room and into the Nashville heat. The game was over. Now, we were just waiting for the execution. The night before the execution of my career, or perhaps the salvation of it, was quiet. It was the kind of heavy, pressurized silence that exists in the center of a hurricane. I sat in the armchair of my hotel room, the glow of the Nashville city lights casting long, distorted shadows across the carpet. My laptop was closed. The evidence was gathered, encrypted, and backed up on 3 different servers. There was nothing left to investigate. There was only the waiting. I looked around the room. It was a standard luxury suite, the kind I had booked for hundreds of executives over the last 7 years. I knew the thread count of the sheets. I knew the brand of the soap in the bathroom. I had spent nearly a decade making sure other people were comfortable, that their logistics were seamless, that they never had to worry about a credit card being declined or a car not showing up. I had built a department from scratch based on the principle of trust, and in return, the system had allowed a predator to walk in, wear my face, and steal my reputation. It wasn't just the $42,600. The money was insured. The money was just math. What hurt? What actually made my chest ache with a physical throb was the violation of my identity. Mallory Vance hadn't just stolen funds. She had stolen the perception of who I was, to the board, to the client, even to some of my own team. I was now risky. I was unstable. I was the woman who couldn't keep her house in order. I stood up and poured a glass of water from the carafe on the desk. My hand was steady. That surprised me. I expected to be shaking, but the fear had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. I needed to make one call. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Kevin's number. He was the youngest analyst on the trip, impressionable and eager to please. I knew Mallory had cornered him. I knew she had planted seeds of doubt. I hit dial. He answered on the first ring. His voice hushed. "Lydia." "Kevin," I said softly. "I know it is late. I hope I did not wake you." "No," he said. "I could not sleep. The vibe. It is weird. Lydia, everyone is tense." "I know," I said. "Listen to me. Tomorrow morning, there is going to be a meeting. A very serious meeting. You are not invited to it. But afterwards, people might ask you questions. HR might ask you questions." "Mallory told me to say that you were confused at the airport," Kevin blurted out. The words came out in a rush, like he had been holding them in for hours. "She told me that if anyone asks, I should say you looked manic, that you were complaining about money troubles. She said it would help you get a medical leave instead of being fired." I closed my eyes. It was so calculated. She was trying to build an insanity defense for me, framing her theft as a mercy to a breaking woman. "Kevin," I asked, "did I look manic at the airport?" "No," he said immediately. "You were reading the contract. You were helping me with the pivot tables. You looked like you always look, focused. Then that is all you have to say." I told him, "Do not lie for me. Do not cover for me. And do not lie for her. Just say exactly what you saw. Can you do that?" There was a pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end. "I can do that," he whispered. "She scares me. Lydia, she smiles, but she scares me." "She should," I said. "Go to sleep. Kevin, we have a flight home tomorrow." I hung up. I had secured the perimeter. I sat back down at the desk. I needed to prepare the final document. The kill sheet. Elliot and I had agreed that I couldn't walk into the executive review with a mountain of raw data. The CEO, Grant Hargrove, didn't have the patience for server logs. The general counsel, David Sterling, would get bogged down in technicalities. I needed something simple, something that a child could understand. I opened a fresh document. I created a single page. I drew a timeline. 9:15 in the morning, Flight 402 pushes back from gate. Lydia Murphy loses connectivity. 9:17 in the morning, user L. Murphy approves $42,600 for Solstice Executive Services. 9:18 in the morning, IP address for L. Murphy, traced to HQ guest Wi-Fi. 9:20 in the morning, user M. Vance sends email to Solstice Shell Company, confirming receipt. It was stark. It was undeniable. I printed it out using the portable printer I always traveled with. I held the paper in my hand. One page to save 7 years of work. As I placed the paper into my portfolio, my phone buzzed with a text message. I looked at the screen. It was Mallory. "You are making a mistake. Lydia, if you drag Greg and my brother into this, you are going to look like a vindictive psycho. I am trying to help you exit with dignity. You are destroying my career over a misunderstanding." I stared at the words. A misunderstanding. She called grand larceny and identity theft a misunderstanding, and even now, in the 11th hour, she was playing the victim. "You are destroying my career." I didn't reply. I didn't type a furious retort. I took a screenshot. I saved it to the evidence folder under intimidation attempts. I put the phone down. I decided to check the shared drive one last time, just to make sure I hadn't missed any project files that needed to be handed off if things went sideways. I opened the archive folder for the Client Experience Strategy deck from last year. This was the project that had put Mallory on the map. It was the presentation that had convinced Grant to give her the promotion over me. I flipped through the slides. I hadn't looked at them in months. Slide 4 caught my eye. The title was The Philosophy of Recovery. The text read, "We do not just fix the problem, we honor the relationship. A refund is a transaction. A recovery is an emotional investment. We must be the architects of trust." My breath hitched in my throat. I froze. I knew those words. I didn't just know them. I had written them. I opened my personal email archive and searched for a message I had sent to Mallory 14 months ago. Back when I thought she was just a friendly new colleague asking for advice. She had asked me how I approached difficult clients. I had written her a long, thoughtful email explaining my philosophy. I found the email. I opened it. Subject: quick question about strategy. Body: you have to remember, Mallory, that we do not just fix the problem, we honor the relationship. A refund is a transaction. A recovery is an emotional investment. She had copied and pasted my email into her slide deck. She had stood in front of the board, used my words, my philosophy, my soul, and claimed it was her vision, and she had been promoted for it. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It wasn't sadness. It was the stinging clarity of total betrayal. She hadn't just stolen $42,000. She had been stripping me for parts for a year. She was a hollow shell, filling herself with my competence and presenting it as her own brilliance. I wiped the tear away. The last vestige of guilt I felt about exposing Greg, the IT guy, evaporated. These people were parasites, and I was the host. It was time to take the medicine. My phone buzzed one last time. It was Elliot. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow morning, they are going to come at you hard. HR is going to call you a liability. Legal is going to call you a risk. They will try to make you feel small so you will sign a settlement and leave." A second text followed immediately. "Do not forget, you are the one holding the company standing up. Without you, the clients leave. You are not the liability. Lydia, you are the leverage. See you at 8. I put the phone on the nightstand. I turned off the lights. I lay in the dark, listening to the hum of the hotel refrigerator. I thought about the first day I walked into Ridgeway Meridian, eager and naive. I thought about the thousands of fires I had put out. I thought about the holidays I had missed, the dinners I had canceled, the sacrifices I had made to be the reliable one. They thought reliability made me weak. They thought because I followed the rules, I wouldn't know how to fight. I slept for 4 hours. It was a dreamless, black sleep. When the alarm went off at 6, I rose immediately. I showered. I put on my makeup with the precision of war paint. I chose my navy blue suit, the one with the sharpest tailoring. I pinned my hair back. I looked in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the frantic, exhausted manager who had been humiliated in the lobby 2 days ago. She was cold. She was calm. She was ready. I packed my bag. I put the kill sheet in the front pocket of my portfolio. I checked out of the room via the app, charging the final incidentals to my personal card without flinching. I walked to the elevator. The hallway was empty. As I pressed the button for the lobby, I realized something. I wasn't going into that meeting to save my job. I didn't even know if I wanted the job anymore. I was going in there to reclaim my name. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. I stepped inside. The mirrored walls reflected a dozen versions of me. "Today," I whispered to my reflection, "I am not asking anyone to believe me. I'm just opening the door for the truth to walk in." I pressed the button for the conference level. The doors closed, sealing me in. The storm was over. The flood was coming. The video conference screen flickered to life, pixelating for a brief second before sharpening into the high-definition view of Boardroom A back at headquarters. The layout was intimidating by design. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Grant Hargrove, his face unreadable. To his right was David Sterling, the general counsel, looking bored and dangerous. To his left, Linda Gray from HR, clutching a thick file folder, and sitting directly across from the camera, looking composed and regretful, was Mallory Vance. I was sitting in a small business center cubicle in the Nashville hotel, wearing my headset. Elliot Klein was also dialed in remotely from his office, his video feed a black square with just his initials, EK, glowing in white. "Let us begin," Grant said, his voice echoing slightly over the speakers. "We are here to review the incident labeled number 9021 regarding the financial block placed on the client recovery corporate account. Mallory, since you filed the grievance, you have the floor." Mallory nodded, smoothing the lapels of her white blazer. She looked straight into the camera lens, her eyes wide with concern. "Thank you, Grant," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. "I take no pleasure in this. Lydia has been a fixture here for a long time. But over the last few months, I have watched her unravel. The pressure of the Nashville contract was too much. At the airport, she was erratic. She gave me her login credentials verbally and demanded I process a deposit for a secret initiative she claimed she had cleared with you personally. I tried to push back, but she was aggressive. I processed the request because I was afraid she would cause a scene in front of the team. When the card declined, she blamed me. It is a classic case of projection." She paused, letting the accusation sink in. "I am worried about her stability," Mallory added softly. "And I am worried about the financial liability she has created." Grant looked at the camera. "Lydia, you have heard the statement. Do you have a response?" I took a deep breath. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. "I do," I said, "but I will not respond with a story. I will respond with math." I hit the share screen button. The kill sheet I had prepared the night before replaced the video feeds of our faces. "Grant, please look at the timeline on your screen," I said. The transaction for $42,600 was approved at 9:17 in the morning. At that exact moment, according to the FAA telemetry data listed in row 3, my flight was taxiing on the runway. I had no internet access. I had no cellular signal. It is physically impossible for me to have logged that approval. "Mallory claims you gave her the password." David Sterling cut in, his eyes scanning the document. "That would explain the login." "It would," I agreed, "if the login had come from a remote device. But look at row 4. The approval came from the headquarters guest Wi-Fi network. Mallory, you were at the airport with me. How did you manage to approve a transaction from the headquarters IP address while you were standing at gate C4? Mallory's face on the thumbnail view twitched. I might have used a VPN, or the system logged it wrong. This is technical hair splitting." "It is not hair splitting," Elliot Klein's voice boomed from the black square. "It is forensic fact, and there is more." Elliot took over the screen share. He pulled up the server logs I had sent him regarding Greg Nielsen. "At 8 o'clock in the morning," Elliot said, his voice cold and hard, "an admin user in IT disabled the two-factor authentication for Lydia's account. That admin user has admitted, in a sworn affidavit signed 20 minutes ago, that he did so at the personal request of Mallory Vance. She told him it was for a surprise party budget." The room went silent. I saw Grant turn slowly to look at Mallory. "A surprise party?" Grant asked. Mallory shifted in her seat. Her composure was cracking. I did not say that. Greg is lying. He is trying to cover his own tracks." "Let us talk about the money then," I said, pulling up the letter from Sarah Jenkins. "Mallory claims I ordered a deposit for the hotel. This document is a formal statement from the regional director of the hotel chain. They do not accept deposits. They never asked for one, and the vendor you paid, Solstice Executive Services, is not the hotel." I displayed the final piece of the puzzle, the invoice metadata showing the author as M. Vance Work Laptop and the shell company registration linked to her brother. "You created a fake invoice," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "You spoofed my login to approve it, and you routed the money to a shell company controlled by your family. You did not do this because I was erratic. You did this because you thought I was the perfect scapegoat." Mallory stood up. She looked around the room, her eyes darting from Grant to David to Linda. "I was forced," she blurted out. Her voice was shrill now, the polished executive facade gone. "I did not want to do it. I was pressured." "Pressured by whom?" David Sterling asked, leaning forward. "Name them." Mallory opened her mouth, but nothing came out. There was no one to name. There was no conspiracy. It was just her greed and her arrogance. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Grant Hargrove closed the file folder in front of him. He did not look at Mallory. He looked at the general counsel. "Get security," Grant said. "Escort her out, suspend her access immediately, and initiate a full forensic audit of every project she has touched in the last 12 months. "Grant, wait," Mallory pleaded, reaching for his arm. "You cannot do this. I brought in the Meridian deal. I am the face of this department." "You are a liability," Grant said, pulling his arm away with a look of distaste. "Get her out." 2 security guards entered the room. We watched in silence as Mallory Vance, the woman who had terrorized the office with a smile for a year, was led out of the boardroom. She didn't look like a mastermind anymore. She looked small. When the door closed, Grant turned back to the camera. He adjusted his tie. He put on his CEO face, the one that was calm, reassuring, and completely fake. "Lydia," Grant said, "I want to apologize. Clearly, there was a systemic failure here. We allowed a toxic element to fester, but you handled this with incredible poise. You saved the Nashville deal. You saved the company $42,000. $42,600, I corrected him automatically. "Right," Grant said, forcing a smile. "Look, we want to make this right. We are going to offer you the director position, effective immediately, 20% raise, full autonomy over your team. We need someone with your integrity leading the ship." I looked at him. I looked at the man who, 24 hours ago, had told me to cooperate and implied I was guilty. I looked at the company that had allowed Mallory to gaslight me for a year because she used the right buzzwords. Elliot spoke up. "Lydia, before you answer, you should know the rest. The audit I ran last night shows this wasn't the first time. Mallory has been siphoning small amounts for months. If you hadn't caught this, she was planning to file a report next week claiming you were embezzling. She had the paperwork ready. She was going to send you to jail to cover her tracks." I felt a cold shiver, but it passed quickly. "Thank you, Elliot," I said. "And thank you, Grant, for the offer." "So we have a deal?" Grant asked, picking up his pen. "No," I said. Grant froze. "Excuse me." "I decline the offer," I said. "And I am submitting my resignation, effective immediately." "Lydia, be reasonable," Grant said, his voice rising. "We are giving you everything you wanted. You won. She is gone." "I did not win," I said. "I just survived. And the only reason you are offering me this promotion is because I caught her. If I had come to you yesterday without that server log, you would have fired me. You listened to her lies for a year because she made you feel comfortable. I cannot work for a leadership team that requires a forensic investigation to believe its most loyal employee." "You are walking away from a career," David Sterling warned. "I am walking away from a crime scene," I said. "I will send my formal letter to HR within the hour. Good luck with the audit." I disconnected the call. The screen went black. I took the headset off and set it on the desk. I didn't feel panic. I felt lighter than I had in 7 years. I walked out of the business center and into the lobby. My team was waiting by the elevators with their luggage. Kevin looked at me nervously. "How did it go?" he asked. Is Mallory okay?" "Mallory is no longer with the company," I said, "and neither am I." The team stared at me in shock. "What do you mean?" Kevin asked. "Where are you going?" "I am going to start my own firm," I said, looking at them. "A consultancy that actually fixes problems instead of hiding them. I need a team. It will be hard work. The pay will be tight for the first 6 months, but no one will ever steal your work, and no one will ever lie about you." I paused. "Who is in?" Kevin didn't hesitate. He picked up his bag and moved to stand next to me. "I am in." The other 2 analysts looked at each other, then at the hotel doors, and then at me. They picked up their bags. "We are in," they said. I smiled. It was the first real smile I had worn in a long time. "Then let's go," I said. We have a flight to catch." We walked out of the hotel doors and into the bright Nashville sunlight. I checked my phone one last time. The pending charge of $42,600 had been reversed. The balance was zero. But my account, my personal account of dignity and self-respect, was full. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate betrayal and ultimate redemption. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from your office, your car, or maybe while relaxing at home? Please drop a comment below with your location, and let me know if you have ever dealt with a toxic coworker like Mallory. If you enjoyed seeing Lydia take down the system, please make sure to subscribe to Boss Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people who need a little justice in their lives.